Welcome back to News and Views. Joel Heitkamp, your host, Abby Miller, your producer. We're joined by President Tim Downs. I know we were talking about President of the United States a second ago. Well, that isn't the job he wanted. That isn't the job that he applied for. He is the president of MSUM in Moorhead. We're going to talk higher ed a little bit. He's the 12th ever president of MSUM. Now, here's the hook. What's going on in higher education? Because higher education is a competition as well. It's a competition for that student, the product that you provide that student, so that they come and they want to have that graduate and that diploma hanging on the wall. President Downs joins us so we can have that conversation. President Downs, good to have you on News and Views.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Thanks for the invite.
How are you liking the job so far?
It's great. It's all about the people, and the people I work with are just awesome people.
Give people some background on what got you to here.
Well, the reality is when you look for a job like this, you want to go someplace where the system is really solid. So the state of Minnesota really supports higher education and education in general, PK to 20. So that's a big deal. And then looking at the Minnesota state system, it's a great system that has a real sense of vision of doing things like building equitable programs and opportunities for everyone to advance themselves intellectually and advance their careers. And that just fits with me and who I am. So
the campus of MSUM, when you saw it from afar, before you were acquired into the position, what did you see?
Well, there's a really great sense of campus. There's a community there. There's nice facilities. But that's just the structural piece. It really, what's the important thing is the people that you work with. So then as I started to interact with people, immediately I could feel that we had the same philosophy and the same goals.
Okay, so if we can, let's talk about higher education as a whole, because you at MSUM, and one of the reasons that I was anxious to talk to you, are going to do something if they fit into a certain income criteria, similar to what they're doing in Williston, at Williston State, which is they'll pay your tuition. You know, You come on in. If you meet a certain criteria, we will pay your tuition. We believe in the product. We want you here. We're going to develop you that way. That's a huge tool in recruiting students, I would think.
It is. And when you talk about the issues of equity, that's what this program is about. If you make $80,000 or less as a family, then this will help close the gap for the last dollars to make sure that your tuition's paid for. So they'll have federal money, they'll have state aid, and then there's this new North Star promise that says we're going to try and close the gap so you don't have to pay tuition, because that means students have to work less. If they have to work less while they're in college, some is okay, but then they're going to pay attention to their studies and their human development, and they're really going to have that full college experience.
So what does that mean to the average student in terms of their savings over the course of a year?
It'll vary by student, but it could be, $2,000, $4,000 that they don't have to come up with, either as a family or as an individual or a student loan.
So that's $4,000 less student debt.
Exactly.
That's a difference.
Well, and it stacks on top. 4 years and maybe 5.
Yep.
So the less debt we can provide students, the better.
I remember when MSUM led the way for that bachelor's degree a number of years ago and said, look, if you stick to this plan, we promise you, we will get you out of the doors in 4 years. And I thought, brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. And that doesn't take into account the fact that somebody switches their degree and those type of things. I don't think that would be fair to you or your institution. But other campuses had to adjust to that.
Right.
They did, because you started seeing some butts in the seats because of it. Do you think that you're going to get more students based upon this?
I think it'll help, because if the student looks at the value proposition and the MSU Moorhead campus and the faculty and the staff and the facilities, they're great. It's a great, what I call, learning community. So we don't have to feel like we're second to anybody and what we're going to deliver for that student. So once they realize that, and they look at this opportunity as the gap closer, then we think we're going to get more students.
So the one thing that you can't argue is the sheer statistics of a bachelor's degree versus not having one. And if you get a bachelor's degree, you're going to make more money than if you don't. Right. Now, that being said, I've been talking about how wherever there's advertising, whether it be on this radio station, this family of stations or not, people are advertising for help. help wanted. We need you. We need you. Come work with us. To the point where the worker themselves is really in the driver's seat in many cases in terms of how much you're going to pay me an hour wage is. What would you say to that student that's 18 years old, 19 years old, is debating going into an institution of higher education, who looks at you and says, hey, I got a job waiting for me right now for $90K. What would you say to that student?
Well, you have to look at the long view. So if you're a student that really likes to learn and information is important, and college, the 4-year degree is important, then they should pursue that. If a student is much more on the technical side and they're trade oriented, that's fine as well. We need people to actually fix things that are in our social infrastructure or our homes. So students pick their lane, and as soon as they pick their lane, let's make them think about the long view. For example, when I went to graduate school, I got out as a professor with a PhD, and I made just over $30,000 a year. People said, are you crazy? You just went to college for 10 years. I said, no, it's the long view. I'm going to have a career in higher education, and I'm going to move up the ladder and be a professor. And then I went on to be a dean and a provost and now a university president. So I had the long view. So we have to teach students, have the long view, and you'll have a better vision of where you're going to end up. And they have to be a little patient. Where there's instant needs and gratification society, you have to take a deep breath and say, what's the long view?
So it's also your job to take a step back because you're being funded publicly and say, what does society need? What do they need? What's the void here? And I'm going to use my side of the river as an example because I know my cousin, Lynette, a great educator, went through your institution. By the way, she was really good at track too, which is part of why she went to MSUM. But you sit there and the world needs teachers. Yeah, it needs teachers. Yes. MSUM has turned out some absolutely fabulous teachers. How do you get them there? Because in North Dakota, they're looking at lowering the standard of what it takes to teach because they don't have enough in the room.
Right. Whenever there's a shortage, we have to go to drastic measures. But I think the reality is you want teachers who are well prepared, who understand the psychology of the student and the content and human development, and they really help each student as much as they humanly can. So you need to have teachers that are well prepared. It's not just the teaching, the pedagogy, it's all that's happening in that classroom and all that's happening in that school to make sure that students stay on track. It's a big job. It's one of the most important jobs in our country.
Do you think higher ed is slow to react to what happens in the new world? Because I think that higher ed in 1980 had this product, and if you didn't like it, tough. Here's the product we have, and you're going to need this product versus what people are able to shop and buy in higher education now simply by going online. I mean, do you think that institutions of higher learning such as yours are up to speed with today's world?
It's a challenge because we live in a fast-paced world and change is happening as you and I are sitting here. So the reality is one of my goals is always to be a regional and a community partner, including economic and workforce development. So what I ask all the time is, please tell us what you need, what skill sets, what knowledge you need our students to have, and we can work to build that into our curriculum. Now, we don't want to become hyper-vocational, but we need to have them able to think and write and communicate and then work within a discipline or within an area of study that then transfers to the workplace. So we need to have that transference conversation all the time with industry so they look at them as very much hireable and easy to inculcate into the university, from the university to the workforce.
When we come back, I want to talk about the relationship that higher ed has with secondary education. I want to find out what your philosophy is in terms of opportunities that began, in my opinion, already by a sophomore class in high school.
Sure.
Is K-12 education communicating with you? Are the two realizing that they have the same job, just at different ages?
We do, and that's a pretty much a national standard. So, for example, Dean Lee and the faculty and education are constantly going to the school districts and build partnerships because we need to know what help they need, and they need to help us as well. So the partnerships could be things like the cadet program that we have, where a dozen students from the Moorhead School District can come over and get concurrent enrollment and learn from the other side what is education and how they might prepare themselves to be a teacher. So it gives them this snapshot of, hey, this is what the life of a teacher is, and they get college credit for it that transfers to Moorhead. So it's a neat thing, and we're always trying to figure out where the students are. At the break, you had mentioned COVID and what happened with students during COVID. I think everybody was disrupted, and we've had to come in and backfill the gaps that may have occurred over time, whether it's employees that lost contact with the workforce or people in education that just felt that little bit of disconnect. The learning was happening, but it was a different style of learning. We just have to constantly assess, did the outcomes get met? And if there's a gap, then we do that. If students show up on the Moorhead campus and a student has a learning gap, we have a student success model. We'll close the gap and move them forward.
Are we setting goals in higher education in a fair way? And by that, I mean this. We're having less kids.
Right.
There's less kids for you to educate. And so you're being judged on your total enrollment numbers at times when there aren't as many kids coming your way, whether you like it or not. I mean, you can do things like you are with your tuition, but, I had 2 kids. I was one of 7. I mean, the reality is there's going to be less kids out there. How do you deal with that?
So with the shrinkage of the 18-year-olds coming to college, we have to diversify our portfolio, which we're constantly working on. Graduate programs, adult education, online programs, because it might be somebody that's 28 to 35 years old that decided they want to pivot and go into a different area of study, which leads them to a different career. We need to be that provider because that, as to your point, that 17 to 22-year-old student population has declined and it's settling at a lower rate. So we have to be adaptable to create different models of learning and providing learning for other populations.
Do we hear enough about the success stories? I mean, we're sitting in a studio right now, and part of our team here on the News and Views Network is a gentleman named Madison Quinn. Now, he went to school at the place that you're the boss of now, and he turned out pretty doggone good. But not a lot of people are going to realize, the successes out there. Oftentimes in higher education, we hear the failures, the dropout rate, those type of things. How do people like you get word out about the Madisons?
I ask everybody, tell me stories of the greatness of what's happening on campus so I can share it, because I have more of a public face, and that's part of my job. So I want to share all the positive stories I can, because too much of life we can talk about the negativity. Let's talk about the student that came in on full scholarship, really struggling, and all of a sudden something ignited, and now they're on the dean's list, and they're graduating, and they're going to a graduate or professional school, and they have a life that is beyond the means that they ever expected of themselves. That's what we do in higher education. It's almost like magic, because the student just suddenly realizes, I can do this. You've built in the confidence in themselves. And then what we really have to do at that point in time is just get out of their way. It's awesome. Well,
I have 2 great dragons here I work with, Amy Eiler and Madison Quinn, and both of them have a great work ethic, which is part of it as well. Absolutely. As somebody who manages staff, I can tell you they can be brilliant, they can be well educated, but if they don't get up in the morning and go to work, you don't care.
Most of life is showing up.
Exactly. It's good to visit with you. Look forward to many more of these conversations. And if nothing else, I'm glad you've got these folks in North Dakota a little nervous. Maybe it'll make them look at, what's the term, outside the box to find ways to cut down student debt.
I think competition stimulates us all to be better.
I agree. I really agree.